See you all again. I hope you had a productive morning so far. We are really fortunate today to have Dr. Fugate with us to talk about a topic that is an interest area of all of ours, I think, neurodiversity and bisexuality. Dr. Fugate is Provost and Chief Academic Officer at Bridges Graduate School of Cognitive Diversity and Education. You'll be interested to know, on our event, we can word that for you.
That other little university, just down the road a bit. I know. I'm well aware.
So that's the good news to some and some are like but anyway, he's a frequent presenter on topics in this realm. We look forward to hearing from him now, and then again this afternoon at 2, he's going to do a workshop. So, that.
Great. How's everybody doing today? You had a good conference so far? Learned a lot? Fantastic. I love that. I want to thank you all for letting me take a little bit of your time today and talk to you. This is a passion area of mine. I love this work. I absolutely love this work. I love working with these kids. I don't get to work in schools as much anymore in my current role, but I get to work with an amazing group of educators, parents, advocates every day at the graduate school, and it inspires me. And one of the things that I have learned over the years, and this is free gift with purchase. I don't know why I'm going down this path, but here we go. I used to teach undergraduate pre-service teachers. And one of the things I used to tell them on the first day of class, say, just remember this, hold this into your mind, write this down. When you're in that classroom and you walk out at the end of any given day, if you haven't learned something new from your students, you probably had a bad day, right? These kids teach us something new every day. We just have to have the open hearts and open minds to hear what they're saying. And so I'm going to start off, forgive me, I tend to ramble. I fall into the ADHD category. I often say I'm 1E. I got that part down real well. And kind of this is a gifted boat. I tend to tell stories. I tend to go down rabbit trails at any given point during this keynote. And the workshop later today, I'll probably start telling a story, then I'll be like, why did I tell somebody tell me why I started this? But I want to start out with the story of one of my kids. Right? My Michael. He is my muse. He's really the kid that set me on this path. And so I was a K-8 gifted coordinator in the Houston Independent School District. And in HISD, if you were to tell people you were a gifted coordinator, the follow-up question would be, oh, what grade do you teach? Right? Y'all are familiar with that? So that was like being the gifted coordinator for the school was my side gig. So I got to meet Michael when he first came to us in kindergarten. And we did universal screening and identification in kindergarten. And Michael popped up really quickly. Incredibly bright, incredibly advanced vocabulary. He was one of these kids, like he may have been this tall, but you're talking to him and you find yourself in a really deep, insightful conversation, and you kind of forget his age, and you're like, dude, you want to just like go grab a beer after school? This is really interesting, right? And he was funny. He was imaginative. A typical conversation with Michael in the morning might go something like, start out with a purely simple question. How was your evening? What did you do last night after school? Oh, I went home, did some homework, went outside and played a little bit, then came in for dinner. Oh, what did you have? Spaghetti. Oh, good. And then in the middle of dinner, a witch came flying through the window, and she was being chased by a dragon. And then a knight came in and slayed the dragon and chased off the witch. And I'm sitting there like, did you really have spaghetti? At what point did we go from reality to fantasy, right? He was that kid. He was incredibly inquisitive. So I taught second grade reading language arts, because math is hard. Sorry, math teachers. My partner, Christy, taught the math and science arts. And Michael's best friend was Brenda. And we learned quickly that Brendan and Michael did best if they were in separate groups, right? So that they weren't in the same group to be in the same classroom at the same time. So recess was big, because this was their time to get back together, right? And so on our campus, we had a Texas habitat. In case y'all didn't notice by the way I talk, I'm from Texas. Had a Texas habitat, and it had little areas representing of all the geographical parts of the state. So we had some prairies and some desert plains and some woodlands, and we had wetlands. And at recess, Brendan and Michael would make a beeline straight for the habitat. Their favorite area was, in fact, the wetlands. Why? Yes. Frogs. There were frogs in the pond. Loved the frogs. So much so that they would catch them and bring them in. And so Christy and I would have conversations with them and say, that's a habitat. That's their home. We want to get the frogs in the habitat. We don't want to bring them in. Okay. So it went pretty well. Till one spring Friday, I was following God's 11th commandment of every second grade teacher, thou shalt give the spelling test. And I'm walking around the room and I'm saying the word, they're repeating the word, I'm saying the word again, and then I'm using the word in a sentence, and then they're writing the word, right? We got our flow. Everything's going great. And I'm walking around, I got my little cheat sheet, and I kick an eraser. Right? I see it out on my board. Well, I think, one of the kids dropped the eraser. So I'm not missing a beat. I'm still saying the word. They're repeating the word. I'm going through the whole thing. I bend down and pick up the eraser. Not an eraser. Michael, what have I told you about bringing frogs into the classroom? I didn't bring a frog into the classroom, Mr. Fugate. Michael, there is a frog hopping across the room right now. Looks me dead in the eye and goes, Brendan's is in his backpack in this belly trip. Right? Totally ratted him out. That was Michael. This was also Michael. He was what Susan Baum called, he was that alphabet kid. Right? There was a lot going on. In first grade, I would venture to say that Michael probably spent more time in the principal's office than he did in the classroom. And so it started to wear on his self-esteem and his identity. Now, the way I told you we were K-8, so in the mornings, when the kids would come in to school, they could go and have breakfast, and then kindergarten through 5th grade would go to the auditorium to wait to be dismissed. Middle schoolers, 6th to 8th grade, would go to the gymnasium. And so in the auditorium, there were sections. So all the kindergartners sat in this section, 1st graders, so on, right? So you can imagine what it was like for Michael in an auditorium filled with 448 of his closest, nearest, and dearest friends, right? There was also one empty section. That's often where Michael ended up. Might as well have been a memorial plaque. He was there so much. And so, knowing this about him, on the first day of 2nd grade, I pulled him aside and I said, "Hey, Michael, I know sometimes being in the auditorium is challenging. Just know, I get here early. I'm always here. When you get to school, feel free. You can come here. You can come straight to the classroom if you'd like. It's your choice. And you can catch up on work. You can help me get set up for the day. Whatever. It's an option for you." Sometimes he would. Sometimes he wouldn't. We were probably still within the first month or two of school. Michael chose to come to my classroom. He walked in, and right away I knew there was something wrong. Because he wasn't telling me a story. He wasn't bouncing around the room. He just kind of walked in, put his stuff away, and then he went to his table, and he sat down. So, let him get settled. And I went and I pulled up a chair next to him. I said, "Michael, is everything okay? Anything you want to talk to me about?" And he looked at me and he said, "Mr. Fugate, I'm stupid. I cry at commercials." So you can imagine what it was like to have one of my kids looking at me, saying they were stupid. I had to take a moment, take a deep breath, and then I said, "Michael, why did you say that? I've known you since the day you walked into this building. You are anything but stupid." He said, "Well, Mr. Fugate, I can't read. Everybody else in the class can read but me." I didn't remember. Have an in-depth conversation with him. I said, "You know what, Michael, you're right. Reading is difficult for you. You're dyslexic. But you're going to work with Ms. Cochet, our dyslexia specialist. She's going to work with you on strategies. We're going to practice those in our classroom. But here's the promise I'm going to make to you right now. I will never grade you on whether or not you can read the words on the page. What I care about is, do you understand the story? We've got lots of ways to get the words off of the page into your mind. I want to know, do you understand? And so this was the beginning of, really the beginning of my true journey with Michael. And why I'm standing here talking to you all today. So, how many of you pick up a book and then go right to the last page? Come on, don't lie. I know. There you go. Be proud. Be proud. I'm taking you to the last page. ADHD. Attention, Divergent Hyperactive Giftedness. We have got to stop using deficit and deficiency in our language. What does that say? What does that imply? Y'all can talk, by the way. If I'm the only one talking, I'll get real bored, so feel free to jump in.
They're broken.
Broken. Can't. Flawed. Something missing, right? There's nothing missing. They're not broken. They can't. They can. It's not that they can't. They can. They just do it differently. They do it differently. So I told you about things I would tell my pre-service teachers. I warned them at the beginning of every semester. I'd be like, you're going to hear me say things over and over again every day, and you're going to roll your eyes every time you hear it, but it's because it's important. Right? Here was the other piece that I would reiterate time and time again. When you're standing at that door on the first day of class, reading those 20, 30 little sets of angel eyes walking into your room, the only person in that classroom who has to make a change is you. You have to be the one to change to meet their needs. Their needs. You have to be the one that learns their story, who they are beyond the walls of that classroom, so you can start to bring that into the work you're doing with them. We've got an estimated 385,000 quite exceptional kids in our classrooms. Estimated. Why is it only an estimate? Why don't we know? Right? So many reasons. Not the least of which is we have this very definition of what gifted is and how we identify them. Right? We don't know for sure, and we certainly don't have a systemic way to identify our twice exceptional kids. We're taking a guess. There's a lot of them that are sitting in those classrooms. Here's our gifted populations. Right? Look at this. Students served in gifted and talented programs. Let's look at special education for a minute. What just happened here? Gifted, special education. Gifted, special education. What do we notice? Right? Who are we identifying? And who are we not identifying? Right? To borrow a phrase from my friends at NASA just up the road from my house, Houston, we have a problem. Right? Where do we need to start looking for some of our 2E kids? Boom. Right there. Whoops. Sorry, I got overexcited. It's really important, people. So what do we know about kids with ADHD? First of all, working memory is a problem. Not just our kids with ADHD, but the kids with learning differences. Working memory is hard, right? And the quick and dirty definition of working memory is that ability to hold something in mind just long enough to carry out that task, right? Woo! I get in trouble a lot at my house. There's a lot of cash fingers for God. My husband does not have problems with working memory and likes to remind me quite frequently How many things get accomplished in one part of the house and not in the other? Right? Obviously, part of that is that with that working memory is that failure to maintain attention over time. Right? And so that would tell us that this is a group of students who should not be able to really delve deep into problem solving and critical and creative thinking, right? So we think about it, there's this idea of latent inhibition, right? All you neurotypicals out there. Sorry, I put the clicker down, this is visual aid. When you're out there and you're working on I feel like I'm taking on math, but really for kids with lower working memory, word problems are the bane of our existence. Right? Because you got Sally and Jackie and they're getting on the bus and 4 kids get on and 4 kids get off and somebody brought on a radio and somebody else brought on the iPod and they all rode 30 minutes and 4 people got off, and what time did Sally and Jackie get on the bus? I don't know. What am I supposed to be looking at? Right? Pulling out that relevant information. Neurotypicals. Like you can do this, right? You can put your blinders on. You can close off that peripheral. This is what it looks like for us. Right? It's wide open. Sometimes it's way back here. It doesn't even exist. But here's the reality. These are the kids that tell those creative stories. That have that imagination, that curiosity. These are the ones that are using a lot of those nonverbal strategies, can really, I hate this term, but almost hyper-focus, right? They get drawn into something that they're really interested in. And then what becomes the challenge for you? Not for them. What's the challenge for you? To switch, right? To transition. And this is really interesting. Keister and Zental did a study a few years ago, and they looked at cooperative learning groups that had students with ADHD compared to the groups with problem-solving groups of students without any members with ADHD. And guess who came up with a higher percentage of creative problems? It was the group with the ADHD students. Right? So we have to change how we're looking at these. This was interesting. White and Shaw have done a lot of work. They do a lot of work with adults. And a few years ago, they did a study that was looking at how are ideas generated? What are people's preferences? Well, students who identified with ADHD had that preference for that idea generation, right? They had that preference for coming up with all of those creative ideas. It was the non-ADHD students who really wanted to take those ideas and go through them and find, how do we implement? How do we make it happen? How do we make it work? In my own work, we looked at gifted students. So one of the things that came up when Sydney and I were looking through all of these various studies was that there was really nothing that isolated giftedness to that point, looking at specifically gifted students with ADHD. And so we wanted to isolate the giftedness piece. And what we found out was that our students who were gifted with ADHD scored higher in their creative divergent thinking abilities than the gifted students without ADHD traits. And, you know, in research we like to talk a lot about statistical significance, but then the question becomes, but does it really mean anything? And when we went to look at the effect size of that, is it not just statistically significant? Is it practically significant? I can't remember exactly what it was. I think it was like 0.87 effect size, right? That's a lot. That means there's something there. That means we have to start changing the way we look at these students. And so we talked about the latent inhibition piece, right? Think about that. If we're coming in with 2,000 bits of information every second that we've got to filter, right? Go back to that white and shaw piece. Why do our kids with ADHD have a preference for generating ideas? Starting to put the puzzle together? Because all of those ideas, it's all coming in, right? That's an active brain. Thinking about all the possibilities, all the ways. So what do we need to do in our classroom? One of the things that we know is dopamine, right? I'm not going to go deep into science. I'll let our science teachers handle that. But we know that dopamine is one of those things that gets us motivated, keeps us excited, helps with our attention. Well, unsurprisingly, for our kids with ADHD, there tends to be insufficient dopamine levels, right? And so that can account for some of that lack of focus, that lower motivation that we think we see in these kids. But if we just get them up moving, focusing on attention, engaging in activities that are of interest to them, getting them moving, that is a natural increase in those dopamine levels, right? So again, we've got to stop thinking about doing school the way we've always done it, and start moving to what I like to call controlled chaos. How many of you have classrooms where the furniture is convenient accessories for putting your stuff on? Yeah, that was my classroom. My principal was a former middle school teacher. No offense, middle school teachers, but she didn't get it. She would walk by my room and I think there was a look of fear in her eyes. Right? I remember I had a mom who was that, Thursday before school starts on Monday, come meet the teacher. At our school, the class list was cut closely under wraps and wasn't unveiled until that Thursday evening. I forgot to mention we were 100% magnet. So all of our kids really came. We didn't serve the neighborhood. They came from all over the city. So we had a really incredibly diverse population of students. But they would come to us in kindergarten and stay through 8th grade, right? So parents became very intimately involved. I'm sure you all understand. I'm sure there were some very similar parents. And so the class lists were always kept closely under wraps. The big unveiling. And I had a mom come up to me one year, and she said, "Oh, Matt, I have to tell you, I was so glad to see Kevin was in your classroom. if you teach him one thing this year, please teach him how to sit down in his seat. I was like, oh, we're going to have a problem. Said, there's Miss Lazenby. You might see if you can convince her to change classroom, because I don't care if Kevin sits in his seat. See, this was Kevin. Right? He was a bouncer. Miley Cyrus, she owes him royalties. He was the original twerker. Right? I didn't care if Kevin sat in his seat. You know why? Because when he was bouncing, he was focused. See, chairs were a convenience when we needed it, for those who needed it. Tables, our tables were. Kids were underneath the tables and carpet squares and pillows and all around the room. It was constant motion in that classroom. We have to get our kids up and moving. We have to get out of this idea that school means sitting in your seat and doing a workshop. Okay, all the things that I didn't think I would talk about, but then stories start popping into my head. So when I talk about this, who here's been to Houston? Familiar? All right. Now you know we're basically it's a city that sits on a swamp, right? You may notice this. This is why we just call it Thursday flood day, right? As soon as it rains, it floods because we're set up on a swamp. We have this system of items. And it's very, very common to have students in gifted programs when it comes time to study the water cycle. Take them down to a bayou, because there's always a bayou, right? There's always one close by. Take them down to the bayou. And you'll see teachers do great things, right? Oh, I know you love to draw. And so, here, while you're down there, draw what you see in the ecosystem around the bayou. We're going to take water samples, but expanding that knowledge. You like poetry. Here's a journal book. Here's a sketch pad. Here's a camera. What are we doing with the kids who are identified with learning differences? They're sitting in a classroom with a textbook, a pencil, and a piece of paper. What is challenging for them? Sitting in a chair, reading a textbook, writing down on a piece of paper. And we wonder why we're not identifying our 2E kids. We need to get them up and get them down to the bayou. We need to know where their interest areas are, where their talents are, where their strengths are. So we stop looking at them through this deficit lens and start to focus on a strength-based dimension of learning. We need to identify the ones who need that sketch pad, who need that camera, who need a voice recorder because they like to write poetry too, they just have a hard time writing it down. We need to get them out of their seats and moving and engaged in those areas that interest them. There's about an 80% overlap between traits of ADHD and traits of creativity when we start to look at those. 80%. And then you start to wonder about misdiagnosis and misdiagnosis of our students, right? The way they view things, that novelty seeking, that sensation seeking, the veering off task, those things that we later this afternoon we're going to talk about, quote unquote, acting out behaviors, right? in quotes. These are some of those similarities that we start to see in these kids. And so we've got some issues. First of all, masking effect, right? Those kids who are identified as gifted, and we can only see them as gifted, and we don't recognize the challenges that they have, those learning differences that exist. So we see them as gifted, and we only serve them as gifted. Or those kids that are identified for special education, and if they're identified for special education, how could they possibly be identified as gifted? I just was working with a family in the Houston area, in the Austin area, last month. And the mom reached out to me. She got connected to me through a gifted coordinator in another district who she was friends with. Put her in contact with me. And her son had been identified for special education services. And but was not identified in screening for gifted, but did not qualify. And so mom sent me all of his data, both gifted and special education. Oh my gosh, y'all know how special education identification goes, right? Everybody's looking at everything. And they're using all the things. And I'm not a big proponent of looking at final numbers. But this kid's full-scale IQ score was 129. Guess what they didn't look at when they were going through the identification process for gifted? Anything that was in his special education record that was used to identify him. This kid blew it out the water. I was in LA at the time that I got all this in, and I told Susan, I'm like, oh my gosh, sit down and look at this with me. And she's like, why is this kid not identified? You want to know why? So, kudos to the district. I tried to write a very balanced letter. Basically, I didn't want to go, are you all crazy? I saluted them because they were using multiple measures in their identification process. And so, but they were still using the and rule. Y'all know the and rule, right? You got to score here on this, and on this, and on this, and on that. Right? So their criteria was that you meet standard on 3 out of 4 of these assessments. One of them being a teacher rating scale. That the district created. See where I'm going here with this? This was not, it wasn't the hope scale, shameless plug, right? That we have researched and vetted and normed to a variety of groups. This was, I went into a book and I created this list of characteristics. Guess what those characteristics look like? Schoolhouse giftedness, right? Joe originally, those schoolhouse gifted traits. And so the kid didn't qualify for it. And so in my letter I'm talking about, but like if you look here, look at all of these things, and this is what the research says, and I lay out this pathway. So I get an update from mom. The appeals committee denied identifying him for gifted services. And she said, and Matt, thank you so much for all of the time you took and everything you laid out. They didn't even look at your letter or did not take it into consideration. And you want to know their reasoning? Because it wouldn't be fair to the other kids who didn't have access to someone like me. They couldn't see beyond the fact that this child needed special education services and didn't look at the facts that they had collected because it didn't fit into their parameters. Because they couldn't bring themselves to use the OR rule. Not multiple measures, but multiple pathways for identification. These kids are also a minority within a minority. We're going to talk more about that this afternoon, but we're talking about a group of kids, right? We saw 7% identified as gifted, and now we're talking about the estimated 385,000 of them that we think we have sitting in those classrooms. That's a small number, right? And then we start to add on the intersectionality of their identities. Minorities within a minority within a minority of our population of gifted students. And they have this reverse hierarchy of learning. They see learning in the world differently. They relate to it differently. I mentioned the math is hard, right? So I am a great qualitative researcher. Quantitative, not so much. Right? At that other school down the road, all of the graduate programs had to take statistics, right? Basic statistics. Marcia hated me. And not really. But requirement for gifted was we had to take 2 years, or 2 semesters, right? Basic statistics and advanced statistics. Well, at Purdue, because it was required of every graduate program across every college, it was not taught within the colleges themselves. It was taught out of the math department, right? So there was a textbook with, where you got to statistically analyze blood types and mortality rates and car production, and anything but actual education, right? And people will tell you, statistics is not math. It's interpretation and reading the data. That's BS. There are numbers that do things with math. Right? You can't convince me of it. So, for 2 semesters, I was in my professor's office. I'm sure he saw my name pop up on his roster again the second semester. I was like, oh Lord. I was in there every week. Dad, I don't get it. Help me understand this. I got a tutor. Right? I did all this. In my master's and my PhD career, I made exactly 2 B's. All A's. The rest of the way. 2 B's in those 2 semesters of statistics. And baby, I would frame those 2 B's. Hang them with pride. I worked hard for those. And you know what I did after I got out of that? Lovely 2 semesters of statistics. Signed up for another statistics course. The difference was, this one was taught by the statistician in our department. And Yukiko had a rule. Don't sign up for this class until you have your own data to analyze. Reverse hierarchy of learning. See, I had a question. I had data I wanted to analyze. It was about ADHD kids and creativity. I needed to know the answer, right? And so everything that I did in that course was built around those data. Guess what I made in that class? An A. The subject matter didn't change. The statistical analysis didn't change. What changed was those were my data. I was interested in them. I was invested in those data. I needed that just-in-time learning. Where, okay, now it's important to me. I need this knowledge. So I can make that connection between the skill, right? Reading is a skill. I needed that support, that scaffolding, and that interest in what I was doing to make that connection. And that changed everything. We've got to make sure we're understanding that this is the way that these kids learn. We've got to make it important to them. We've got to connect it to their being. And so, one thing to remember about our 2E kids is they are gifted first. First and foremost. It's not that they need to change how they are. Our perception has to change. Our perception as educators. We've got to get off this deficit perspective and start looking at these kids from a strength-based lens. And so to foster that creativity, we need to create an environment where they know they can explore and question and start to identify those strengths and see themselves as learners. We need to give them that opportunity to build a sense of themselves. Where they see themselves in the work they're doing. They see their interests. Where they understand that what we're doing in the classroom is about them, not to them. Right? Michael. I know you all wonder what happened. So, second grade year, we built a lot of trust, right? I had a good footing because I had already been working with Michael through pullouts and in kindergarten and first grade. So we built that trust, and so we would in second grade we would always do a kind of this. We would do projects like a 9-week project each semester. And we had the basic rules, like it's not go do it at home so we can see how creative your parents are and how smart your parents are. We're actually going to do this in the classroom, right? Type of thing. And one of the projects we would do was they would pick a region they would get to choose a region of Texas that they wanted to learn more about. And part of this was starting to develop those basic research skills. And so Michael picked the Gulf Coast region, right? Where we are. It's familiar to him. Great. He went through all the processes, and at the end of the 9 weeks, they would create a product. They could create a product of their choosing, right? Whatever they wanted to do. Well, Michael decided he wanted to create a game. This will not surprise you. There were nights in the game. Not sure what that had to do with Texas Gulf Coast or anything in history, but that didn't matter. Because all the cue cards, all the quiz cards, were based upon the facts and the information that he had gathered over time. Right? He had little pieces to design this course. It was really impressive. And so we at the end we would do one of these open house and let kids from the other classes come through, other grades come through. Michael's game was the most popular project that year. Kids were lining up to play it multiple times. Right? Fast forward to his third grade year. You know what happens in third grade in public schools, right? State test. In what? Reading. Right? Michael had already been identified through whatever complex statistical analyses that had been done by the district that he was not going to be, we had that little green light, yellow light, red light system, right? Green, this kid's projected to pass and do well on the state assessment. Yellow, the bubble kid, right? It's just a little extra support. And then the red lights, don't even bother. Michael was a red light for that reading assessment. But we worked on building those strategies with him. At the same time, this is where being the gifted coordinator came in handy. I was able to, because I had a little sway over the class list for the following year, so I had identified what reading language arts classroom he needed to be in to support his needs. Because Jamie taught the way I did. She viewed kids like Michael the way I did. And so we started collaborating early on. What worked, what didn't work. Strategies to use to meet Michael's needs. And so Michael went up to third grade. Spring day. I'm in my planning period, right? I'm sitting at my desk and I'm grading papers or whatever I was doing. And Michael comes running into my room, waving a piece of paper. He had passed the tax reading test on the first try. Right? That wasn't supposed to happen. He was so proud. He didn't knock it out of the water, wasn't commended or anything like that, but that didn't matter. Who cares? He passed, right? He had, suddenly that kid who thought that he was stupid because he couldn't read was holding a piece of paper that was reaffirming who he was. That was telling him, giving him the proof of what we had been telling him. He was anything but. We need to help these kids find their happy place. That means where do they go? What draws them in? When they're frustrated, where can they go to refocus, recenter, calm? When I looked at gifted girls with ADHD, the study that looked at secondary girls who were gifted with ADHD, all of the girls in that study reported having some way, some happy place, some way to center, refocus, and calm. For some, it was through athletics, running, lacrosse. For one, it was through dance. Another one of the girls made marionette puppets. Right? It was their happy place. That when they felt frustrated, when they couldn't focus, when they couldn't put their attention on something, then they would go and do this. And it was their opportunity to clear their head and say, okay, now I can get back to what I need to do. I've taken myself out of that frustrating situation. And now I can get back to doing what I need to do. Choice. I know Christy talked about this yesterday too. We've got to make sure our kids understand that they are going to be able to choose. Again, learning, we need to develop opportunities where we are facilitators of learning, not givers of knowledge. There is a difference. That doesn't mean everything we do has to have a choice. There are some things we know, there are some things we don't have a choice. When I'd have to give that assessment, we used to do the Stanford 10 assessment for a week, because that was a good use of our time. All learning stopped, so we could give this test for a week. But okay, that's what we had to do. There was no choice. That meant we had to sit in our desks. Right? Provided unique challenges, especially for my kids who weren't familiar with that concept. But they knew they had choices, and that made it easier when we got to the times where we didn't. Because we built that trust. We need to give them opportunities to stretch their wings, to recognize that they have such amazing, unique gifts and talents, that they're in a space where we recognize them for their giftedness, not for their challenge areas. And look, I've had people over the years tell me, well, you're almost like I'm being too Pollyanna-ish about the whole thing, right? You know? Because there are real struggles. Believe me, I know. I've lived them. I was that student with ADHD sitting in a classroom. By the way, we didn't know that at the time. Guess when I got to figure that out? As an adult. Because I'm of a certain age. Where we weren't really looking for that yet. Right? So I grew up in a tracking system. You know, once a blue bird, always a blue bird. I would say always make them birds. Was that supposed to be nicer? Right? Because you knew the red birds were really the ones who were soaring. There was a little blue bird. I got to be a blue bird, kindergarten through 5th grade. Then I got to go to an independent school, and that changed. So thank you for the work you do. Because then people started providing me with challenge. It stopped being about remediation and started to focus on enrichment. And so we need to give them those opportunities, those experiences. And we need to provide them with time. Time to think. Time to process. Time to come up with those ideas. All right, university classrooms used to make me nuts at my old university. Because, you know, we were downtown. So every time you'd walk into a classroom, there'd be this whole beautiful wall of windows with the blinds closed. Because heaven forbid that students were able to look out beyond the walls of that classroom. How many of you were daydreamers, are daydreamers? Maybe procrastinators. Oh yeah, there you go. My procrastinators. Raise your hand. Raise your hand. That's it. Be proud. Be proud. I'm a procrastinator, but I don't call it procrastination, really. It's percolation. I may not be doing it, but I'm thinking about it. And I'm thinking about it a lot. And all of those, right? My blinders are wide open. And with a little bit of time, once I've had time to think about it, to let some of the creativity in. You know, I told you all at the beginning, I tend to be a storyteller. You look at a lot of what I write and work, I blend stories into it. I wrote a chapter on this topic for Ray Kaufman's book a few years ago. And I submitted the draft. And I got an email back from Scott, and he goes, "Matt, I love it. But why didn't you tell a story? You didn't add one of your stories in." Right? So for the first time, I used the story of Michael. By the way, Michael's in college. He's doing really well. He's a theater arts major now. I ran into his grandmother a few years ago. She caught me up. We need to give them time. We need to recognize these kids for their strengths, their resiliency, the way they overcome those challenges that they face and shine. We need to remember that they're not ADHD. They're ADHD. Attention, Divergent Hyperactive Giftedness. Spread the word, folks. Thank you very much.